You wake up every morning with a weight on your chest that has no name. It's not sadness exactly, it's not fear, it's something quieter, more persistent. A voice that whispers before you even open your eyes, "You're not enough. You'll never be enough." And no matter what you accomplish, no matter how many people tell you otherwise, that voice remains. Unwavering, unforgiving, relentless. This is the psychology of people who don't feel good enough. And if you recognize that feeling, if that voice sounds familiar, you're not alone, you're not broken, and you're definitely not imagining it. What you're experiencing has roots so deep, they stretch back to the very beginning of who you became. Today we're diving into the mind of someone who lives with chronic inadequacy. Not the occasional self-doubt that everyone feels, not the temporary insecurity that comes with new challenges, but the bone-deep belief that you are fundamentally lacking, that everyone else got some manual for life that you never received. Because here's what most people don't understand about feeling inadequate. It's not about what you've accomplished. It's not about your bank account or your achievements or how many people follow you online. Some of the most successful people in the world carry this burden. They climb mountains and still feel like they're standing in valleys. They win awards and wonder when someone will discover they're a fraud. They build empires while feeling like they're barely keeping their heads above water. The psychology behind chronic inadequacy is complex and it's cruel. It rewires your brain to filter reality through a lens of deficiency. You become a detective for your own flaws. You collect evidence of your shortcomings while dismissing proof of your worth. And the most tragic part is that this isn't a choice. It's a learned response, a survival mechanism that once protected you, but now imprisons you. Let's start with where this begins. For most people who struggle with feeling good enough, the seeds were planted early. Not necessarily through trauma, though that can be part of it. Sometimes it's subtler. Maybe you had parents who loved you but only praised you when you performed. Maybe you grew up in a house where emotions weren't safe to express. Maybe you were the sensitive child in a family that valued toughness. Or maybe you were just born with a brain that processes the world differently, more intensely, more deeply. Children are meaning-making machines. They take everything personally because they don't understand that other people have their own struggles, their own pain, their own limitations. When a parent is distracted, the child thinks they're not interesting enough. When a teacher is impatient, the child believes they're too slow. When friends move on to different interests, the child assumes they're not fun enough to keep around. These small moments accumulate like drops of water, eventually carving canyons through stone. What happens next is fascinating from a psychological standpoint. The brain, in its attempt to make sense of these experiences, creates a core belief system. And one of the most devastating core beliefs a person can develop is, "I am not enough." Once this belief takes root, it becomes the filter through which everything else is processed. It's not conscious. You don't wake up and decide to feel inadequate. It happens automatically, like breathing. This is why someone can receive 100 compliments and 1 criticism, and guess which one they remember? The criticism confirms what they already believe about themselves. The compliments feel like lies or mistakes or temporary kindness that will eventually be withdrawn when people see the real them. It's not that they want to feel bad, it's that feeling bad feels familiar. Feeling bad feels true. Psychologists call this confirmation bias. But for someone with chronic inadequacy, it goes deeper than bias. It becomes a way of surviving in a world that feels perpetually unsafe. If you expect to be rejected, disappointment hurts less. If you assume you'll fail, success feels like a pleasant surprise instead of something you deserve. If you believe you're not enough, you can't be devastated when others agree. But here's where it gets even more complex. The same brain that created this protection mechanism also becomes addicted to proving it wrong. This is why people who feel inadequate often become overachievers. They're not chasing success for the joy of it. They're running from the terror of being exposed as insufficient. Every goal becomes a chance to finally prove their worth. Every achievement becomes evidence they can present to the jury of their own mind. The problem is that external validation can never heal an internal wound. It's like trying to fill a bucket with a hole in the bottom. No matter how much water you pour in, it keeps draining out. The hole is the core belief that you're not enough, and until that gets addressed, nothing you accomplish will ever feel like enough. This creates what psychologists call the achievement trap. The more you accomplish, the more you need to accomplish to maintain your sense of worth. The bar keeps rising. The goals keep getting bigger. The pressure keeps mounting. And underneath it all, that original voice keeps whispering, "This doesn't count. This isn't real." Wait until they find out who you really are. Some people respond to chronic inadequacy by becoming perfectionists. If they can just do everything flawlessly, maybe they'll finally be acceptable. They spend hours on projects that should take minutes. They rewrite emails 10 times before sending them. They apologize for things that aren't their fault and take responsibility for outcomes beyond their control. Perfectionism isn't about excellence. It's about fear. Fear of being seen as flawed, human, real. Others respond by becoming invisible. If they can't be enough, at least they won't be too much. They shrink themselves to fit into spaces where they think they might be tolerated. They agree when they want to disagree. They laugh at jokes that aren't funny. They say yes when every fibre of their being wants to say no. They become experts at reading rooms and adjusting themselves accordingly. Not because they're fake, but because authenticity feels too dangerous when you believe your authentic self is inadequate. Still others swing between these extremes. They have moments of confidence where they feel powerful and capable, followed by crashes where they feel like frauds who somehow fooled everyone temporarily. This emotional whiplash is exhausting. It's like living on a roller coaster that never stops, never lets you off, never gives you a moment of steady ground. What makes this even more insidious is how our culture feeds into these feelings. We live in a world obsessed with comparison. Social media shows us everyone else's highlight reels while we're intimately familiar with our own behind-the-scenes struggles. We see success stories without seeing the failures that preceded them. We witness confidence without understanding the doubt that lives beneath it. For someone already struggling with inadequacy, this constant exposure to other people's curated lives becomes psychological torture. Every scroll through social media becomes evidence of how far behind they are. Every success story becomes proof of their own mediocrity. Every confident post becomes a mirror reflecting back their own insecurities. They measure their raw, unfiltered reality against everyone else's polished presentations and wonder why they never measure up. The brain of someone who feels chronically inadequate develops specific patterns that are both protective and destructive. One of the most common is called mind reading. They become convinced they know what others are thinking about them. When someone doesn't respond to a text immediately, they assume they've said something wrong. When a conversation feels awkward, they blame themselves entirely. When they walk into a room and people stop talking, they're certain they were the topic of discussion. This isn't paranoia in the clinical sense. It's hypervigilance born from a deep belief that they're inherently disappointing to others. Another pattern is catastrophizing. Every mistake becomes evidence of complete failure. Every criticism becomes proof of fundamental inadequacy. A small error at work means they're incompetent. A disagreement with a friend means the relationship is doomed. A bad day means they're falling apart. Their emotional responses are disproportionate not because they're dramatic, but because each incident connects to a vast network of shame that lives inside them. Perhaps most devastating is the way inadequacy affects relationships. When you believe you're not enough, love becomes terrifying. Not because you don't want it, but because you can't understand why anyone would choose you. You become hyper-aware of every flaw, every mistake, every moment when you're less than perfect. You analyze conversations for signs of disappointment. You brace yourself for the inevitable moment when they realize you're not worth the effort. This creates a paradox that's almost impossible to escape. You desperately want connection because it's the only thing that temporarily quiets the voice of inadequacy. But connection also feels dangerous because it gives someone the power to confirm your worst fears about yourself. So you find yourself pushing and pulling simultaneously, moving closer when you feel rejected, moving away when you feel accepted. It's not manipulation, it's terror. Some people try to earn love through service. They become the friend who always gives but never receives, the partner who anticipates every need but rarely expresses their own, the family member who solves everyone's problems but suffers in silence. They mistake being needed for being loved, not understanding that relationships built on utility eventually crumble when the service is no longer required. Others try to earn love through entertainment. They become the funny one, the one who makes everyone laugh even when they're dying inside. They learn to perform happiness so convincingly that even they sometimes believe it. But comedy becomes a shield, humour becomes a deflection, and somewhere along the way they lose touch with who they are underneath the performance. The workplace becomes another battleground for inadequacy. Every meeting feels like a test they might fail. Every project becomes an opportunity to be exposed as incompetent. They work longer hours not because they love their job, but because they're terrified of being seen as lazy. They volunteer for extra tasks not from enthusiasm, but from the desperate need to prove their value. Success feels temporary and fraudulent. Failure feels inevitable and deserved. What's particularly cruel about chronic inadequacy is how it steals the present moment. You can't enjoy achievements because you're already worried about the next challenge. You can't savor compliments because you're analysing them for hidden meanings. You can't rest because productivity is the only way you've learned to justify your existence. Every moment of peace feels unearned. Every moment of joy feels borrowed from a happiness account you're not sure you have permission to access. The voice of inadequacy is relentless in its creativity. It finds new ways to confirm its narrative no matter what evidence contradicts it. When you succeed, it whispers that you got lucky. When others praise you, it insists they don't really know you. When you feel confident, it reminds you of every time confidence led to disappointment. It's not trying to be cruel. In its twisted logic, it's trying to protect you from the devastation of hoping for something you don't deserve. This is why simply thinking positive thoughts or practicing gratitude, while helpful, rarely touches the core of chronic inadequacy. The problem isn't a lack of appreciation for good things. The problem is a fundamental belief system that interprets even good things as temporary, undeserved, or insufficient. It's like trying to paint over rust without treating the corrosion underneath. The surface might look better temporarily, but the decay continues. Understanding this psychology doesn't immediately fix it, but it does something crucial. It helps you recognize that the voice telling you you're not enough isn't the voice of truth. It's the voice of protection gone wrong. It's a security system that's so sensitive it sees danger everywhere, even in safety. It's not your enemy, but it's no longer your friend. The journey from inadequacy to self-acceptance isn't about convincing yourself you're perfect. It's about learning to be human without apology. It's about understanding that enough isn't a destination you arrive at through achievement. It's a truth you uncover by excavating through layers of learned beliefs to find the person who was always there. Always worthy, always enough. Always enough. So if you recognize yourself in these words, if that voice of inadequacy has been your unwelcome companion for too long, know this. You are not broken. You are not fundamentally flawed. You are not the exception to human worth. What you carry is the residue of experiences that taught you to question your value. But those experiences do not define your truth. The voice that whispers you're not enough is not the voice of wisdom. It's the voice of a child who learned to survive by expecting disappointment. It served a purpose once, but that purpose has expired. You don't have to silence it completely, but you can learn to hear it without believing it. You can acknowledge its presence without giving it power over your choices. Healing from chronic inadequacy isn't about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were before the world taught you to doubt yourself. It's about reclaiming the parts of you that got buried under layers of protection and performance. It's slow work, patient work, but it's the most important work you'll ever do. Because here's the truth that inadequacy doesn't want you to know. You were enough when you took your first breath. You were enough in your worst moments. You were enough when you failed, when you stumbled, when you felt lost. And you are enough right now, reading these words, carrying whatever weight you carry. The world needs what you have to offer. Not a perfect version of you, not a version that has finally achieved enough to matter. Just you. Flawed, learning, beautifully human you. That has always been enough. That will always be enough.